Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual health talk. My name is Melissa, and on behalf of the Patient Education and Engagement Program here at the University Health Network, I would like to thank you for attending today's session called Let's Talk About the COVID-19 Vaccine. I would like to take a minute to thank our planning team. First, the Patient Education and Engagement Program, our Patient Learning and Experience Center staff, the Patient Partners Program, and the Education Technology and Media Services. Now, a few words about our online format. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing with closed captioning at this same YouTube link afterwards. Today, we'll have a presentation for approximately 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions for the rest of the session. So then to submit your questions, we invite you to go to the you can also scan the code using your smartphone's camera or QR code reader app, and you can submit questions anytime during the presentation. We want to quickly thank those who have submitted questions already. It helps us see what people are interested in learning more about. We have tried our best to address these within the presentation, but we'll definitely answer them again during the question and answer period if needed. When you submit your questions, you may notice it doesn't get posted right away. This is because we're now reviewing questions before they show up for the audience. This will help us make sure questions won't get repeated, but also gives us more time to address new and different questions. It also gives us a chance to prepare how to answer these questions before they show up. We just want you to please keep in mind a few things before you submit your questions. First, you can choose to include your name or stay anonymous, but please note that others will be able to see your name if you do include it. Please do not include any personal details about your health or your condition in your question. Our health talks are for general health information only, so our speakers are not here to diagnose or provide treatment recommendations. We'll try our best to answer as many questions as we can during the question and answer period. You can also vote for your favorite questions by clicking the thumbs up button beside the question, and this will help bring those questions closer to the top and they'll more likely be answered. If you have any questions about the live stream during this session, you can email us at pfep@uhn.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-603-6290, and a member of our team will get back to you shortly. On the topic of technology, we realize anything can happen when it comes to internet connections. So with that said, should my internet connection cut out at any point or any of our speakers, have no fear. You'll be seeing one of our amazing colleagues step in to help facilitate the session. Lastly, we would love to hear your feedback about this presentation. Your feedback will help us know what you found helpful, how we can improve our sessions moving forward, and what topics you would like to see in the future. So please go to the link on your screen and complete this survey at the end of this session. Or you can scan the code again using your smartphone's camera or QR code reader app, and it will take you to the survey. Now, moving on to our presenters. First, we'll have Millie Dolansky, who is a longtime UHN patient partner. She has been involved in many initiatives across the organization, including the Quality Improvement Plan, or QIP, Discharge Summary Program, and Caring Safely, just to name a few. She continues to be a member of the Patient Partnerships Co-Design Team and the UHN Accessibility Advisory Council. She is passionate about providing the patient perspective and advocating for the needs of patients and caregivers in order to help inform a positive, safe, and collaborative care experience at UHN. One of Millie's other passions is traveling. While she's been to several places around the world, including Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Israel, and Jordan, her hope is to explore more of Canada in the future. Then we'll hear from Dr. Abdi Sharkawi, who is an internal medicine and infectious diseases consultant at the University Health Network and an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. He has a wide range of clinical interests, including HIV, viral hepatitis, and antibiotic resistance. He has become a leading voice in public education, featuring prominently on multiple media outlets, as well as participating in town halls and community initiatives to provide expert analysis and recommendations during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have a great group of speakers today, and we're very lucky to have them take the time to speak with us today. And before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the sacred land on which the University Health Network operates. At UHN, we strive to provide safe and inclusive care, and that begins by honoring Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are the original inhabitants of this land and for thousands of years have cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty, an agreement to share, care for, and protect the resources around the Great Lakes in peace and respect. Today, this territory is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this territory. At a session like today's, where we will be learning more about the COVID-19 vaccines, I will be especially thankful to be on this land to hear from our experts and get the information we want and need to make an informed decision. Part of this learning will not only include hearing the science, but also appreciating how this meets the wisdom and knowledge of traditional healing and cultural practices from our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. This is another step I invite you all to take with me to continue to respect this privilege and recognize Indigenous peoples' beliefs, history, and as the original carers of this land. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Millie, who will be starting us off.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everyone. Before I get started, I wanted to share a few words about what brought me to UHN. Years ago, I was diagnosed with asthma and referred to the Toronto Western Hospital, where I met a great lung specialist whom I was seeing for my regular breathing checkups. My asthma was well controlled. I worked, traveled, and enjoyed my life. It was 2001 when I became very ill and was hospitalized with a lung and heart failure. After 2 weeks, I was discharged home with supplemental oxygen and eventually referred to the pulmonary rehabilitation program at Toronto Western Hospital. That was extremely beneficial for me. I was regaining my strength and courage back. It was the start of my recovery journey. Years later, in 2014, another emergency followed. This time, I had to be intubated and put on ventilator. I spent 10 full days in intensive care unit at Toronto General Hospital. My situation was dire, my family devastated, not knowing the outcome, just praying and hoping beside my bed that I would be okay. Thankfully, with the support of my Toronto General Hospital medical team, I eventually came off the ventilator and was able to have rehabilitation to regain my strength. I wanted to share this experience to highlight that being in the ICU is not to be taken lightly, especially as we hear more about patients with COVID-19 requiring ICU. I continued going to pulmonary rehabilitation program, and for follow-up medical appointments, it was important to me to keep my lungs and heart and overall health in good condition as much as possible. At each visit, I would go to UHN, University Health Network, Patient and Family Library, to borrow books, videos, and articles to help me learn how to manage my health. It was then that I decided to become a patient partner. I wanted to share my lived experience and my knowledge with other patients, their caregivers, and the staff, and help improve care at UHN. And suddenly, the COVID-19 pandemic came and our lives were greatly interrupted. There was much thought and constant reminders about how COVID-19 was spreading quickly and how serious our situation was becoming. Because of my respiratory illness and other chronic conditions, I was concerned indeed. To protect myself from virus, for months, I was staying mostly inside of my apartment, missing my family, my friends, and so much more. There were many alone times and long, stressful days. Then there came the announcement, a hope, light at the end of the tunnel. The COVID-19 vaccine would soon be available. What a relief. I had questions and things to consider though, such as, will the vaccine be right for me? Would it be safe because of my chronic illness and health conditions? Who can I ask and where can I go to get reliable and trustworthy information and answer to my questions? I had my questions ready and discussed them with a lung specialist and family doctor. It was important to follow their advice and their recommendations. This is something that I've always done and I will continue to do. Through our discussion, they both confirm and stress the importance of being vaccinated since the benefits of the vaccine greatly outweigh the risk of getting COVID-19, especially in patients with respiratory illness. To help me continue to learn more about the vaccine, I have been also following reliable sources to get as much information as possible. Some of them I would mention include listening to Toronto Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Eileen Davila, and her reports, visiting websites such as Public Health Agency of Canada and UHN COVID-19 website, vaccine website, watching webinars such as questions and answers, information sessions by the Toronto General Western Foundation, and following medical experts on Twitter, such as Dr. Sharkari and Dr. Richardson. Having this information and access to these resources helped me feel confident that getting the vaccine would be the right thing for me. So when I received the invitation to get the vaccine as part of the UHN Mobile Vaccine Program pilot, I was ready. This program goes to homes with older adults, residents, and home care clients. I registered immediately, and in a few days, I received my first shot of the Pfizer vaccine. My experience receiving the vaccine was really seamless. It was so convenient. I didn't have to travel with ETC, and it was so well organized. The injection was so fast. I hardly felt a thing, other than a slight sore arm for a couple hours afterwards. I didn't feel any other side effects. I hope more people will be able to access the vaccine in this way. For me, it is so very important to be vaccinated, to protect myself as much as possible from getting seriously ill from COVID-19, which for me could be even life-threatening. In addition, by protecting myself, I will be protecting others, including my family, my friends, my community, and those that come in contact with. The past year was a long and challenging year, away from everyone, but being vaccinated means I'm now a step closer to being able to visit my mom, whom I haven't been able to see for over a year now, at her long-term care home. I'll also be able to spend time with my family, my friends, and get back to my community activities. I will feel safer and have more freedom to go out and enjoy a cup of espresso and my favorite stone. I would also love to make a trip to my favorite spiritual center in Niagara Falls, where I like to go every year to rest and recharge. I really hope I'll be able to go there this summer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Millie, for sharing your experience with us from getting the COVID vaccine and how you decided it was right for you, but also why it was so meaningful to you to get it. And we also hope you'll be able to see your mom soon too. Now we'll move on to the rest of our presentation. So today's format will be a bit different, where we'll pose some questions to Dr. Abdu Sharkawi and Dr. Lisa Richardson to answer. These questions will address how the vaccine can help prevent the spread of COVID-19. We'll also talk about some common and current concerns about the vaccine, and then we'll speak to some resources at UHN and in the community that can help you learn more about the vaccine. So now let's start with our first set of questions for Dr. Sharkawi. And this theme is on how the vaccines work. So Dr. Sharkawi, our first question for you is, how can the vaccine help prevent the spread of COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you, Millie. It's an honor to have your very inspiring perspective here with us. And this is why we're here. It's for patient care, it's for public education, and it's incredibly valuable to have that sort of perspective shared with others. I also want to acknowledge I'm not at UHN at this very moment, one of the more rare occasions where I'm not. So I'm going to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from the traditional territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Huron people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and other global Indigenous people who call this territory home. So thank you very much. In terms of how the vaccines work and how they prevent the spread of COVID-19, the principle is fairly simple. There's a slightly different mechanism by which each one of these platforms works. In the case of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, those are what we call mRNA vaccines. That's a type of material that is made in a lab. It is synthetic and it is manufactured in big quantities, and it is almost like a USB key in terms of the information that is coded into it. It is engineered so that when this is injected into our bodies, it instructs our cells to make copies of the spike protein, which is the major target for vaccines. It's why this virus attaches to our cells and allows itself to make trouble throughout our lungs and the rest of our body. So the mRNA vaccines will trigger antibodies to be produced, and that will then be able to provide us with some protection. Once we're actually exposed to the real virus, we'll have antibodies ready to fight the virus and we won't get sick. If we're talking about, for example, the AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson vaccines, those are what we call viral vector vaccines. They use what's called an adenovirus, which is a very, very common virus that causes the cold and lots of other typical respiratory tract infections. And it is not live virus. It is a very weak form of this virus. And that provides a vehicle for which the information will be guided by the vaccine, again, to get into our cells and then trigger a similar host response. We will be making antibodies through that mechanism. We have some other vaccines that are hopefully going to be approved that are called Novavax, for example, and that uses something called a protein subunit, slightly different way. At the end of the day, they all trigger our immune system to make copies of the spike protein. None of them contain live virus, so they're not likely to make us sick. They are not going to cause us to get COVID-19, regardless of what level of immunity we have. And despite what you've heard and a lot of different things that have been going on, overall, the benefits greatly outweigh the risks. And overall, these vaccines are very, very safe in almost every circumstance. Vaccines prevent us from spreading the disease because what they do is they allow our bodies to prevent the disease from becoming established inside of us and replicating. And therefore, even if we get a small version of a given infection, we may not have enough in our system to replicate long enough to share it with somebody else. So even if the vaccine is not 100% protective against protecting us from getting an infection, it's still going to provide a fair amount of benefit in terms of the length of illness, the severity of illness, and also the likelihood of spreading it to someone else. So vaccines have been the best thing to happen in medicine in the last 150 years. There has been nothing that has saved more lives than vaccines, whether you're talking about polio or smallpox. Now we're talking about COVID-19, and we talk about the flu every year. It's the right thing to do. So I hope I can convince you that you can get the vaccine, protect yourself, and protect your family.
Thank you, Dr. Sharkawi, and I really appreciate your clear explanation of the different vaccines, because I feel like that's a question that a lot of people have. And that brings us to our next question about herd immunity. So could you please spend a couple minutes telling us what that is and whether people need to get vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity?
Yeah, the concept of herd immunity is really based on this idea that protecting the herd, literally, if you thought of us as cattle, for example, and you wanted the pasture to be safe and you wanted the farm to thrive and to flourish, you want as many healthy bodies, beings within that given space so that you could prevent something from continuing to spread. The idea of herd immunity is based on not allowing a virus to continue to find targets. If we have a large portion of our population in our community that is unvaccinated, then that gives the virus, in this case, the SARS coronavirus 2, an opportunity to keep finding targets. If it still has an opportunity to find targets, that target can find another target, and a pandemic will continue to go on unchecked. So what we really want to do is we want to have as many people as possible become immune so that when the virus reaches them, it bounces off of them and it has a host that is not receptive, will not allow it to infect them, and thereafter will not allow themselves to infect anyone else. It's sort of like the idea of it takes a village to raise a child. We're all looking after each other's children in a sense. And so at a certain point in time, the estimates are somewhere between 75 to about 90%. When we have that many people in our community who have become immune, then that provides the virus a really big challenge in terms of being able to set up shop in someone who will continue to propagate transmission. So that's what we're aiming for. Now, in ideal circumstances, people would be able to fend off this virus on their own, and they would develop immunity naturally, and a virus would run out of steam. We have found clearly and painfully that that's not the case with COVID-19, and that if we rely on people requiring their own natural immunity, millions of people will die. So we need help from the vaccine to accelerate our course to herd immunity. And that is really the most important part of achieving that. We can't rely on people fending this off on their own. And so hopefully everybody gets the vaccine at the first opportunity that we can, because once herd immunity happens, that's when we can look forward to changing our lifestyle, to easing restrictions, to getting back to some understanding of and semblance of normal and all those wonderful things we held sacred that we have unfortunately had compromised over the last year and change.
Thanks, Dr. Sharkawi. And that's also what Millie had said too. Getting vaccinated doesn't only protect yourself, but it protects those around you and your community. So thank you. So our next question, you had already touched on the major differences between the vaccines. So we wanted to know from you specifically, which vaccine should people get? Because I know there's some questions about one being better than the other or more effective.
Really good question. And I know that there is a sense of eye rolling or maybe disbelief or lack of trust when you hear the refrain, the best vaccine is the first one you can get. The truth of the matter is that that really is true almost all of the time. And the reason why we say that is that despite issues blood clots, for example, or allergic reactions, and a lot of things that have become very, very public, and sometimes I think distorted in terms of the degree of risk associated with any particular vaccine. The same important metrics that I think guide us towards a sense of security are consistent throughout every single vaccine that has been approved. And that means preventing serious illness, it means preventing hospitalization, and it means preventing death. And so if we are talking Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, or Novavax, which will probably be the next vaccine that is approved and then available, they all provide 100% protection against all of those very important issues. Now, you're going to argue, well, why do we have these differences? Everybody hears 95%. Pfizer, Moderna, that's the gold standard. And then you hear 62 or 66% with, another vaccine, or 76%. So why would you settle for quote unquote second or third best? You have to remember that, number one, the differences are largely based on mild disease. So it's not based on serious disease that's going to cause you real serious harm and end up in the hospital. There is the possibility that you could still get long COVID with mild disease, but the risk is quite rare. The biggest studies show us that it's under 3%. So it's not negligible, but it's probably nowhere near as serious as you may think. So let's try and avoid comparing the 62% to the 94 and 95%. Remember, the 100% that is important in terms of protecting you against things that matter. There will be some issues, potentially with respect to certain age categories, relating to some of the issues that have recently been brought up, with particularly the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I think with the supply chain improving, we may be given an opportunity to have a bit more flexibility in terms of what vaccine someone may want preferentially. But I think that is going to be a very rare circumstance. And I think that by and large, we will save more lives. We will get out of this pandemic a lot sooner, and we will provide much more overall benefit if we don't look at this from a shopping and comparison point of view. Because the truth is, when we examine this over the course of millions and millions and millions of people, the signal for benefit is huge. The signal for harm is very, very small. And we really should think of it in those terms when we decide if we're going to get vaccinated and what we're going to take.
Thank you. And that's really helpful to know too, that it's try to get the one that you're offered first. So thank you. And that also leads to our next question. So as we hear more about the COVID variants that are looming around now, how effective are the vaccines in protecting us from these variants?
Yeah, there's good news here and bad news, but the good news is much more plentiful, thankfully, than the bad news. The good news is that the most dominant variant worldwide is what's called B117, which was first identified in the UK. It has now unfortunately become the dominant strain here in Ontario and in many parts of the world and other parts of Canada. While the vaccines are not as effective overall against the variants, you're not seeing 95% anymore. We're seeing ranges up to 60%, even in the high 80s with some of these vaccines. But again, it's really predicated on serious disease. They're all preventing serious disease related to this variant B117. There is a bigger variation in terms of B1351, which was identified in South Africa. And the only real big outlier here is that the AstraZeneca vaccine clearly is not effective. The efficacy is only about 10%, so it's entirely inappropriate for South Africa, where they've suspended its use, not surprisingly. Thankfully, that variant is not very prevalent here in Ontario or in other parts of Canada, and hopefully that continues. And then there's the Brazilian variant P1, for which we don't really have too much information, but again, thankfully is not very prevalent. So overall, I think we're in good shape in terms of these vaccines providing adequate protection against the variants considering the current landscape. But the sooner more people get vaccinated and the less virus that's circulating in our community, the less likely other variants will be able to emerge, and the less likely we'll have to worry about whether the vaccines are going to be able to protect us. So we hear about the race of vaccines versus the variants. Right now, they are winning, but we can win if we start stepping up our game. And a big part of that is making sure that we don't hesitate to get the vaccine at the first opportunity available.
Thanks, Dr. Sharkawi, for that reassurance. So yes, getting the vaccine will offer a lot more protection for sure. So we'll move on to our next theme, and it's on vaccine safety. And we know a lot of our patients have had questions about this. So just to start, is the vaccine safe?
Yeah, so I will address this very generically to begin with and address the concern or fear that these vaccines can't possibly be safe because they were developed in record time, and we're not used to seeing a virus identified and then sequenced, and then never mind one vaccine, but 5 vaccines or more within a year. This is unprecedented. It's true, but this is a product of the excellence in biotechnology, in science, and medical research over decades. This is a culmination of that, and this pandemic has put that to the test. But no rules were broken here. I want to assure you that instead of taking several years to amass the thousands of people that are required to get to a phase 3 level of a clinical trial, we assembled those thousands of people in a matter of months. It doesn't matter that it only took a few months. We still got a representative sample of people. And we got them from many different parts of the world: Brazil, the UK, South Africa, the US, etc. They're generally a diverse group of people, not necessarily as representative of people over the age of 65 in every trial. We will be completely honest and transparent about that. But in general, we've done a pretty good job here of getting a wide spectrum of people at a phase 3 trial level to make sure we didn't break rules. People will remember that there was a case of something called transverse myelitis with one of the vaccines. The trial was suspended, and patient was looked at very closely. It turned out that the issue was not vaccine related, and the vaccine trial only resumed after ensuring that that was the case. So the safety protocols were followed during the trial. And then a lot of people have concerns about the fact that these were released, and they're saying, okay, well, they've only been around for a few months. How do we know something's not going to happen in 6 months or a year? So for reassurance there, we have to look back at the history of vaccines in general. If we look back at every vaccine that has ever been deployed on a mass scale over the last 150 years, 90% of any serious side effect or concern happens within 45 days of receiving that vaccine. So something that you get in 2021 is not likely going to cause a side effect in 2022, never mind even later, probably not even 3 months later. What the trials did was that they waited until 60 days after the last dose. So if it was a 1-dose trial, they waited 60 days after that. If it was the 2-dose trials, which is the case more often than not, they waited 60 days until after that second dose before they collected the information and said, these are the safety results. So they actually went above and beyond the typical convention and standard for safety here. So yes, no rules were broken. The methodology was sound. The statistics were sound. Unfortunately, some of the communication has not been great. I can't stand here and say that AstraZeneca has done a great job of communicating things in terms of their dosing protocol And in terms of some of their results, which is a shame, and the great analogy here that I heard the other day is bad coach, great player, but bad coach. We shouldn't blame the vaccine. We should really be concerned about how the communication is presented. We need to work on that. But by and large, the data is fantastic. Whatever you look at, whether it's anaphylaxis, even the blood clot situation, the risk is so incredibly low compared to the risk of COVID and COVID causing serious and life-threatening complications. And I can give you whatever specifics you want, but that is a universal truism across every vaccine.
Thank you. And absolutely, as Millie had also said too, like the benefits of getting the vaccine definitely outweigh the risks of COVID and getting COVID. So we've had a lot of people also ask us specifically, should they get the vaccine if they are pregnant or breastfeeding, may want to get pregnant in the future, if they're immunocompromised, have more than one chronic health condition, such as a heart condition, or are under the age of 18. So we'd like to ask you for your perspective on these different scenarios.
So the simple answer to all of them is yes. And I can explain to you why in more detail. First of all, in terms of pregnancy and breastfeeding, this is a very interesting topic because generally pregnant women are not included in vaccine trials out of an abundance of caution. We want to make sure that a non-pregnant population is safe before we extrapolate information or go beyond that for providing guidance to pregnant women. And that's just out of an abundance of caution, being very, very careful about things. But again, in general, if we look at the types of vaccines and what is deemed safe or unsafe for pregnancy, we know that what are called killed vaccines are universally safe compared to live vaccines. So killed vaccines mean they do not contain live virus. And what we're talking about now, we're talking about mRNA, which is just, a synthetic material that is coded. It's made in a lab. With the vector vaccines, that is a killed virus. The adenovirus is a killed virus. It's a very, very weak form of this virus that's unable to cause disease inside of us to the quantity that could make one sick. Killed vaccines are safe in pregnant women. We use the flu vaccine, which is killed. We use pneumonia vaccines. We use hepatitis A and B vaccines in pregnant women all the time, and they're all very, very safe. That is in contrast to, for example, the chickenpox vaccine or the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. These are live vaccines, and we typically would not recommend that for pregnant women. Okay, so that's an important distinction to make right there. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that isn't an issue, that's not something you trust. Well, lo and behold, reality still happens. And even though the Pfizer and Moderna trial tried to deliberately exclude pregnant women from being enrolled, people got pregnant. Not a lot, somewhere around 37 did get pregnant. And interestingly, of the few that suffered a miscarriage, they were all in the placebo group. So none of the people, the pregnant women who were in the vaccine recipient arm, I think there was somewhere around 15 or so. Don't quote me on that, but it's in that neighborhood. They were all completely fine. No issues with respect to their pregnancy being harmed or issues post-pregnancy. And importantly, if we look at the consequences of COVID and pregnancy, they can be quite severe. So there's a higher risk of blood clots due to COVID in pregnancy. There's a higher risk of preterm labor. There's a higher risk of issues once the baby is born, simply related to COVID. So very, very important, again, based on history of vaccines, the fact that they are killed, and what we've seen that is definitely safe for pregnancy. In terms of breastfeeding, no concerns here. The vaccine really doesn't reach the bloodstream of a nursing woman in enough quantities to do anything. And even if it did, by the time it was ingested by a nursing infant, it would be degraded in their stomach acid. So absolutely no concerns whatsoever there for pregnancy or breastfeeding. You mentioned immune compromised patients. This is again, a point where the risk of a problem related to the disease itself, a secondary infection related to that, if you get a bacterial pneumonia on top of COVID pneumonia, that is far, far more likely an issue and a concern than a problem with the vaccine. So definitely cancer patients, patients with chronic kidney disease, patients with chronic lung disease, heart disease, you name it, diabetes, all of you are going to be at a much higher risk if you don't get the vaccine of getting a more severe problem related to COVID-19 than otherwise. Importantly, a lot of people don't have the right information about being immunosuppressed. So that's different from being immune compromised. Immunosuppressed means you may be taking prednisone for lupus, or you may be taking a biologic therapy for Crohn's disease, or something for psoriatic arthritis. Interestingly, we have found that the risk of a flare of one of these conditions is much higher if you get an infection, whether it's the flu or in this case, COVID-19, than any risk to you from the vaccine triggering a problem. So this is something that you should really, really be reassured about. And interestingly, we found that a little bit of immunosuppression may actually be a good thing, may actually control the possibility of COVID getting worse. We've used some immunosuppressive therapies like steroids and others to help control COVID-19 in sicker patients. So whether you're immune compromised or you're immune suppressed, the vaccine is good, is healthy, and it's safe and important for you to get. I think another question was around people under the age of 18. I suspect that we're going to see the same thing. The trouble is we don't have the data right now. Pfizer and Moderna both enrolled younger patients from 12 onwards, starting in January. And Moderna has just recently started another trial with kids even as young as 6 months of age. I think that probably we'll be seeing some results at some point in the summer that are going to give us some real good data on the results. And because we have safety data in most of our adult population, really this is designed to see what dose is going to be optimal more than anything else. And we're not going to need the same number. We don't need 50,000 kids. We need much lesser numbers to give us a representative idea, which is going to make it easier to complete these trials and hopefully get our kids vaccinated before the end of 2021. I think that is a very distinct possibility that I'm very excited about too. I don't know if I missed on any other age groups or any other.
You got it. Thank you. Thank you for covering that in such detail too. And thank you for reassuring us that the answer is yes, you should still get it, whether you fall into these categories. And if you're not sure, always talk to your family doctor, your healthcare provider for reassurance. So just to be mindful of time, so we just have one last question for you before we speak to Dr. Richardson. So just very quickly, just knowing that this is a very hot topic right now, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization recently recommended waiting 4 months to get the second dose. So if you could tell us very quickly, why was this change made and how protected is someone after the first dose?
Okay, so at the risk of sounding like a constitutional lawyer, I want to be very, very careful about how this is worded. And I'm not here representing NACI. I want to make that very, very clear. I'm only representing myself and whatever information I can responsibly provide for the public. The recommendation was up to 4 months. Okay, up to 4 months. So those two words, unfortunately, have been lost in this. And I think that that's really critical here because there has been a lot of trust lost based on the fact that I think the assumption is that it is 4 months or nothing at all. And we do have to make a very clear distinction. Where this recommendation came from was no doubt in part based on the issue of not having enough vaccines in a plentiful enough supply to ensure that we could give everybody 2 doses and do it quickly enough to get people protected with what we know is happening, with how quickly this virus is spreading, and knowing that we're unfortunately at the mercy of vaccine manufacturers from out of country to give us the supply that we need. So some of it was practical. But in terms of the science is sound for the large part of it. We have evidence from many, many different vaccines, whether you're talking about hepatitis vaccines or routine vaccines we're giving to kids and others, that if you extend the interval between the first and second doses, which are truthfully booster doses, to give your immunity that shot that it needs, that we don't see a lesser response. So that's just basic vaccine history and experience. But if we look more specifically at COVID vaccines, and you look at the trials, there were a number of patients in the Pfizer and Moderna studies, not a lot, but a few that got their vaccines, their second dose at 35, at 42, even 48 and 49 days. And the difference between the benefit at that time compared to 21 or 28 days was no different. In fact, there's a difference suggesting that the extended dose interval was better. There was a bigger difference in terms of number of people getting COVID who didn't get the vaccine versus those vaccinated. Ironically, the best data comes from the AstraZeneca vaccine. That is a bit of a PR nightmare right now. And they actually did different dosing intervals and found that even up to 90 days, people getting the second dose were not only protected, but probably protected much better in terms of the likelihood of getting COVID compared to those that didn't get the vaccine. Now, obviously, all different vaccines, and want to be very careful about noting that there were not definitely enough people over the age of 65 or people with serious immune compromising conditions to make that recommendation of even up to 90 days, a recommendation we should have. And frankly, there is no data that suggests that 120 days, 4 months, is solid. And understandably, many of you are concerned because we've seen recent data that suggests people who have cancer, organ transplant recipients, and others don't do well if we extend that second dose. I'm quite confident and I'm hopeful that what will happen is that we're going to take this very seriously and that we are going to revise our recommendations for people in higher risk groups in particular to move as close as we can back to the trial-based protocol of giving that second dose. I think that it's unlikely and probably still okay to give a second dose later for most of us, for people who fall outside of that. And I think that getting more people protected with one dose first overall will be better in terms of getting us to herd immunity more quickly. So I hope that explains it. I'm sorry, I know I probably went off a little bit there, but I think it's such an important topic and I want to really make sure people understand the difference between politics, expediency, and science, because there's a bit of all of that playing into that narrative.
Thank you, Dr. Cherkaoui, and I appreciate the thorough explanation too, because I know this is a question that came up multiple times in our Slido, so thank you. And thank you so much for answering and clarifying all the questions and misconceptions that may have been looming around about the safety of the vaccine, so thank you so much.
I want to apologize profusely. You know, I've never been accused of being succinct, so I'm sorry for going over time. You can spread the virus even if you're vaccinated, and you may have seen in the news there was an outbreak in a nursing home in BC specifically related to this. Now, thankfully, the cases were all mild, but the idea is especially shortly after you've gotten the vaccine, your immunity takes time to get established. So the older you are, the more health conditions you suffer from, the more immune compromising issues you have, the longer it's going to take for you to establish those antibodies that protects you if you are exposed to the virus. So you've got to be very careful. It's not a light switch. It takes time, and that may be 2 weeks. it may be up to 3 months in certain instances. And that's why we have to be very careful about not assuming that you can't get the virus once that needle goes into your arm. You can. And that's why we want to be very careful until we get a lot of people vaccinated for a long period of time to know all of us have likely established our immunity.
Thank you. So if there's anything that everyone should take away is to continue to follow the public health guidelines, even if you are vaccinated, and to follow your public health unit as well in their recommendations. So in the last 2 minutes, we'll just check our Slido to see if there are any top questions that we can answer. So the first one, let me just pull it up here. So Patricia has asked, we are seeing more studies saying that we should not delay the second shot for the older population and those who are immunocompromised. How do we keep those most vulnerable given the NACI considerations that we delay the second shot? So I think Dr. Sharkawi, this is related to what you were talking about.
I mean, I think I touched on this sort of already. My hope is that the recommendations are revised specifically to address these parts of our community. I don't think we can afford to be dogmatic about this. And I think we need everyone to feel safe and to feel a level of trust that is critical to get through this. So I think much of this is obviously going to be predicated on our supply chain. I'm quite hopeful and very confident that we're going to be seeing that ramp up a lot. Now, it hasn't been anywhere near where it should, but there are really good signs of how quickly things are changing. The doubling time in terms of getting from 1 million to 2 million to 3 million, 4 million Canadians, that time has continued to shrink. So I think that that's going to give us a lot more flexibility, and I think it's going to give us a little bit better discretion to protect people exactly like this, to get them closer to that second dose than up to 4 months, which I don't think is going to be a tenable strategy.
So unfortunately, it's already past 2 o'clock, but I wanted to thank you both for taking the time out of your busy days to speak with us. And just to close very quickly, I would just like to let everybody know, 1 second here, that if you still have questions for the presenters, please feel free to email us at pfbp@uhn.ca and we'll try to respond within 1 week. I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get through all the questions in our live audience Slido today, but hopefully the questions that we tackled earlier in the session will also help respond to some of the questions you had. We would also love to get your feedback on this session. So please go to the link on your screen and complete the survey, or you can scan the code using your smartphone's camera or QR code reader app. And lastly, to find out about our next session, please subscribe to our MailChimp e-newsletter to get up-to-date information about the events and also new resources at UHN. You can fill out the form by going to the link or again, scanning the code with your smartphone's camera or QR code reader app. And thank you. We'll hope to see you next time.